What if doing the obvious would be enough to make us more sustainable and be successful? This is just like the thesis I set out to solve with or to explore with this video. My name is Lucas Pianegonda, and I've helped over 30 MedTech companies to be more sustainable with plastics. And yes, let's just get right into it and how I came to it. Because I very recently read The Obvious Atoms, which is a 100-year-old book that will teach you everything you need to know about sustainability in MedTech. Because the Obvious Atoms is a very, let's say, ordinary dude which wants to get into advertising. And the obvious thing for him to do is to ask his potential future employer to work for him. And then he gets turned down and the guy says, yeah, I don't think you have it in you. And then he says, okay, so it was the obvious thing for me to do to go and ask you, and I haven't figured out how to prove it to you that I'm worth it. So I will figure that out. So he didn't even entertain him turning down the opportunity. And that was so impressive to the boss that he hired him. And then like every task he gave him, he did the very obvious thing and he was successful with it. So it's not about having the super framework or a theory that is super complicated. It's usually about doing the obvious things. And the obvious sustainability is not as easy because sustainability isn't complicated. It's very obvious what you need to do. You need to reduce your footprint. You need to make it still economically viable, and you need to take into account that the patient outcome cannot be diminished doing this. The problem is that common sense is usually not common practice. And what I'm trying to do with this video is to encourage you that obvious things don't make you look bad. It makes you better than 95% of your competition. Because obvious isn't easy. It's usually hard work, and it's a lot of data, and it's a lot of analytics that go into this. It's not the fancy, shiny frameworks and a lot of jargon. It's doing the hard work. And it's very obvious what you need to do. Because action beats theory. You can have the best framework and the best process. You need to do the obvious actions. And if you can do that, you will succeed. So the problem is that we usually over-engineer sustainability. I don't think that is especially a MedTech problem. I think it's a sustainability problem. We have a very, let's say, measurement and reporting fetish. We want to have frameworks for everything, and we overcomplicate things usually. We have endless frameworks with buzzwords and acronyms that nobody understands, and we have a lot of jargon and shiny initiatives that just distract us from doing the hard work and the hard actions we need to take. Because the actions we need to take, they usually get ignored because they seem complicated, they seem difficult, and they seem expensive, but they're actually not. So, what are the obvious actions you should be taking? And I will bet that you can name all of them. If you really want to, you can go to a blackboard right now, write down the obvious actions you need to take to make you more sustainable as a company, and I will bet that you will get 80% of what's here. So number one, very obvious, you choose low CO2 materials for the performance that it needs to bring. You cannot diminish the patient outcome in here. It has to be safe and effective, but choose the lowest CO2 material possible for said applications with all the requirements met. You implement eco-design into your development process. You make it lighter, you make it cheaper, you make it less parts, you make it disassemblable, include the material, of course, in the eco-design, and you're good to go. Where possible and where sensible, you should switch to hybrid or multi-use models. Multi-use and hybrid models, although difficult in logistics, although you're not selling too many products, they reduce the cost and the CO2 efficiency of your surgery or procedure or whatever you're delivering by manyfold. I have a separate video on when single-use makes sense and when multi-use makes sense and where hybrid can come in, so check that out. But overall, with very complex devices with a lot of electronics, it's obvious that you should go for a reuse model. Then when transporting stuff, you should avoid air freight. It's very obvious, but it is like where most of your transport CO2 emissions come from. Freight ship, everything that is cargo shipping is very efficient. Train is also very efficient. Truck is medium, I'd say, but air freight is where the most of your CO2 in the shipping comes from. You should optimize packaging. Seems obvious, yes? By volume and by weight. You need to balance a little between sterility and the packaging impact, but it's very obvious that you should think about your packaging, think about your packaging materials, and that you should optimize it as much as possible. You should source locally whenever possible. That's not only to avoid your transport CO2 emissions, but it's also about faster supply chains, leaner production, and you're also easier to collaborate with your suppliers if they're very local. And it de-risks a little your geopolitical risk overall. Then you should simplify your supply chains. If possible, work with suppliers that are committed to sustainability, which is a little the next point. And you should simplify your supply chain. You should have less components. And if possible, you should have less complex supply chains because they're also easier to monitor. You have only one person to talk to. And that helps you a lot with your reporting, with your data gathering. And it also makes it easier to negotiate sustainable development goals with your supplier. And then you should train your team to conduct an LCA, which makes them able to calculate the CO2 and other footprints of your materials. So I think if you hit 5 of those, you're very good to go. It's these obvious actions that need to be taken that everybody's reluctant to actually do or is difficult to do, but it's where the obvious things come in. It's not that difficult to do or to figure out what you need to do. It's just hard work, and therefore nobody wants to do them. Everybody thinks that there has to be more to this, but there's actually not. I have a very small caveat. Not all options that seem sustainable are sustainable. So greenwashing is very widespread, especially on the material front. Everybody has the new silver bullet that solves all the imaginable problems for sustainability, because a lot of the sustainability also runs on heuristics, on rules of thumb. And I think the biodegradables run in this direction. It's like being biodegradable is not actually that much of an advantage from a sustainability perspective. Like being bio-based and having a lower environmental footprint due to that, a lower carbon footprint, that is very helpful. But degrading over time means the shelf life is worse. The waste in production is usually worse because they're difficult to process and all that stuff. So how should you go about this? How do we solve the problem that we don't really know which of the obvious things are just sold to us as obvious? Well, the solution is you just emulate obvious atoms. Because in the book, what he does is he thinks deeply about the problem, and then he does what seems obvious to him. For example, he has this task to do advertising for 2 stores, and one is underperforming and one is overperforming. They send them down to the city where those 2 stores are, and they don't tell them what the underperforming and overperforming store is. And then the obvious thing for him to do is to go look at the store. And he goes to the store, and one he finds is on a outskirt of the city, but very prominent. You can see it directly, and people will see the front of the store. They can walk into it. And the second one is like on the main street, which is very expensive real estate. They have a very bad display window. So he walks past the store like 3 times until he finds the entrance. And that is the obvious problem for him. So it's not about advertising. It's just about, I think this store is at the wrong location, and it's just, let's say, bad layout. So he gathers data. He gathers how many people just walk past it and how many can walk into it. And this is like the data he gathers to verify his hypothesis of what seems obvious to him. And this is exactly how you should go about this. So if you want to go and say, yeah, we need to change our materials. That's another example. We need to change our materials in order to make us more sustainable. Then what you do is you think deeply about the problem. Obvious thing is we should do the materials. And because everything else doesn't have much of an impact. Then you gather data. You see how much material you're using, of which material, and how much of CO2 impact they have. And then you see, oh, the biggest lever is actually the material. It's actually, I'd say, 60% of our CO2 footprint overall as a company. So this is the obvious thing to be focusing on. Okay, good. Then if you have an electric device, then the obvious thing to focus on would be like the electrical efficiency, how much electricity my device uses. Then you think deeply about the problem. It could be the material, it could be like processing, it could be the transport. And then what do you do? The obvious thing is to focus on what are the actual things to do. So it's either electricity or it's materials. You gather data and you see that your time electricity is 10 to 1 for your CO2 footprint. So 90% of your CO2 footprint, if you're doing a medical electrical device, that is what your use time energy is. So 90% is use time energy. So you should be focusing on the use time energy, make your product as energy efficient as possible. Going for the materials doesn't help you. And these obvious things, those are the ones that you should be focusing on, and you just think deeply about the problem. Then you do and analyze what's obvious and gather data to verify it. Always go with data for your final decision, but go for the obvious things, not because it is easy, but because usually the obvious things are the ones that you need to tackle. So, what rewards do you get for doing the obvious? I think if you do just the obvious things, you're better than 95% of your competition, because everybody is stuck. They're like, we've always done it like this, but if you always run your head against the wall, no wonder you're having a headache. It takes courage to act on common sense in a world that is very addicted to complexity. And everybody who thinks like it can't be that obvious, you're just deluding yourself. It's like hard work and deeply thinking about your problem and having data-driven decisions. It's not that nobody knows those things. It's just nobody does them. So it takes courage to act on common sense. Act on common sense and you'll be fine. You'll be more than fine. You'll be better than 95% of your competition. So until everybody does the obvious, keep saying the obvious. Hack into the same short until they get it. I will leave you with the final quote from the obvious Adams. If it doesn't hit home in MedTech sustainability, I think you're very fine. So, the men in our office say that they often spend hours to trying to figure out what they are going to propose after they have decided what they think the obvious thing to be done. You're trying to figure out what to propose to your boss after you already decided that this is the obvious thing to do. And we're hopping through all kinds of hoops in order to just do the obvious. If we would just go down to action and start doing better with the obvious things we already know that have an impact, we would be much better off. And I think sustainability isn't complicated. It's just about hard work and about data-driven decisions. Good. So if you want to make data-driven decisions and make your devices more sustainable, you just click the link in the description and there's a video explaining how you could be doing this. So if you like the video, like, comment, and subscribe, because YouTube likes those things and it will show you more videos that you will like. Maybe of me, maybe of someone else. And it also helps me. So if you would like to support me, just write a comment. What you liked and what you didn't like about the videos. I really like feedback. If you want to request videos or ask questions, I will read all the comments, give you an answer for those. And if you request a video, I can also try to figure that into my content schedule. I'd like to thank you for watching the video and have a very, very good one. Until the next time.